Super Rugby 2019 season review for the Reds. I hope the weather is better wherever you are watching this because it is absolutely atrocious right now here in Auckland. I guess it's kind of fitting. Given that the Reds didn't have their best year, they ended up finishing 14th overall. 6 wins and 10 losses, I guess, is not a disgraceful record, but it wasn't enough for anything other than avoiding the wooden spoon. And it's actually the same record they had in 2018. So they didn't get any better, they didn't get any worse. I think they actually finished one spot worse off on the table, but with the same record. I think the Blues had a worse record than them last season. But yeah, so kind of staying the same was the theme. But I feel like in terms of the way they played the game, things did change. It was Brad Thorne's second year in charge, so I think we are seeing a bit of development from him. So he certainly has a lot of faith in the younger players, which is a good thing to see for Aussie Rugby. He definitely knows how he wants to play, and I guess he's just kind of getting all his pieces aligned. So you would have to hope that next year is going to be an important year for the Reds, given that it's his third year in charge. He should have all his ducks in a row, but I guess we will see. So we'll start what went well for the Reds, then have a look at what didn't go so well, and then a quick look towards next year. And there was a fair bit of good stuff. I know when I did the Sunwolves video, there was a lot of bad stuff and only a few bright things to look on. But actually, when you look at all the stats for the Reds this season, there's a remarkable number of good things. So they were the fourth best team for run meters. I can't remember what they were last season, but they weren't a great team for running the ball. So they seem to have improved in that area. For being able to truck the ball up 7 phases or more, they were second overall, so they are good at their ball retention, and I think that shows in some of their other stats as well. Like they were one of the teams that had to make the fewest number of average tackles per game, which suggests they've got a fair bit of ball per game. Tackle busts, they were the number 1 team in Super Rugby, which is pretty impressive for a team who didn't even get close to the playoffs. Penalties won, they were third, so they're clearly putting the opposition under a bit of pressure. And points conceded, they were only 5th. So, could have been a lot worse, but I figure it's perhaps some of their points scored that let them down. Error rate, they are the best team, 15th. So, less likely to mishandle the ball than a lot of the other teams, which I guess is kind of surprising. But when I look at some of their other stats, you perhaps will kind of key those things together. Ruck and maul penalties forced, again, number 2, so that's part of their penalties 1. Goal kicks, they were actually the 5th best team, 78%. So the highest team that didn't crack 80 or above. So for the Reds, I guess that's an improvement as well. With Hegarty there, he actually proved to be a pretty reliable goal kicker. Their scrum was 100%. Their line-out was operating at 92%, which is the 3rd best. And winning the opposition's line-out was 6th. So their set piece, for the most part, seems pretty well settled. Decent scrum, good line-out. Decent for getting penalties and trucking the ball up, but it's not all positive because when you do look at some of the things they struggled with, offloads, they are 14th, so they were the second least likely team to offload the ball. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, it could just be a tactical decision. We are going to play safe. Not every team offloads the ball. There are some teams, even ones in Europe, who are very successful without having a big flashy offloading game. In Super Rugby you do feel like it's those key offloads at times which do make the difference with cracking defences. And I noticed, I think it was in one game in particular, the Sunwolves, I think it was their first meeting with the Sunwolves this season in Japan. Was it in Japan? Yes, a 34-31 victory. They were down at half time, and second half they came out and they offloaded, and they were able to cut the Sunwolves to bits with that extra bit of skill. So they did have the skills, it just was a decision not to do it that much. But as I said, the error rate was 15th, so maybe it's playing it safe to try and keep that ball retention. And again, they were 4th for pick and drives, so I guess it speaks to kind of the way he wants to play it. It is Brad Thorne, solid set piece, pick and drives, no flashy offloads, winning penalties, but they were also the 3rd worst disciplinary record for sin bins, so that's always going to set them back. I mentioned their tackles. They were 13th in average number of tackles made per game, which is not necessarily a bad thing. You want the other team to have to make more tackles than you. However, perhaps the key one is for missed tackles, they were the 8th team in terms of the first one being the worst. So if it was kind of by the same ratio as the number of tackles they make. They should be about around 13th for the number of tackles they miss. But the number of tackles they miss compared to the number of tackles they have to make is higher. So there are still defensive issues with the Reds. And also they cough up the advantage line. They are the second team in terms of letting the other team get ground on them. So defensive issues again there, which is I suppose a little bit surprising in a Brad Thorn team, but not so much in a young team. So yeah, there is a fair bit of positive stuff to look on for the Reds there. I was surprised how many stats they actually topped over the course of the season. Individual players, I think the main guy you're looking at is Karevi. He is a phenomenal player. I think you're going to have to call him world class based on these stats. He's by no means a perfect player, but for what he does, he is absolutely excellent. He is the number one guy for tackle busts. Remember I mentioned the Reds were the number one tackle busting team. A lot of that is partly down to him. He had more tackle busts per game than Nani Laumape, and that's saying a lot. He is the number one offloader in the whole comp. So the Reds didn't offload a lot, but when they did, I guess it was him pretty much all the time, because he is the same number of offloads as Anton Lienert-Brown, who we rave about here in New Zealand for being able to offload in the tackle. He was in the top 10 for line breaks. He was number 2 for run meters. If you looked at it by average per game, he was actually number 1. So only Milani Nanai from the Blues had more run meters total, but in terms of average per game, it's Karevi, and he's the only guy who averaged 100 plus run meters per game. So really excellent stuff. However, he was 6th for missed tackles. So that is the trade-off you get with Karevi. He's never been the best defender. He does tend to make a lot of tackles, but his percentage of missing them is relatively high. Also, another guy who came to my attention when kind of analyzing the stats was Taniela Tupou. I'm a fan of his. I like the idea that he can go on to become kind of a legendary prop for the Wallabies and for whichever team he plays for domestically, if it's the Reds or if he travels, who knows. He's got a long career ahead of him and he's come a long way for a prop. But he had the most penalties conceded in Super Rugby with 27 for the season. And to put that in context, the next most penalties conceded was Sekope Kepu with 18. So for him to get that many more penalties is pretty astounding. So I'm not sure what he's doing wrong, but that's not good. You need to bring that down, because for what he brings to the team, you can't be giving away that many penalties. He did have the most run meters for a tight head prop, which is kind of what you expect from him, but not markedly more. There were other guys who were around about, I think the next highest had like 6 meters fewer for the course of the season. And if you include loose heads, Gboka had a lot more than him. So he's not unique in his running ability for a prop. And I love free running props. It's a beautiful thing to see. But he definitely has aspects of his game to work on. He's still young for a prop as well. So the best is still yet to come. So yeah, I guess for next season, the fact that Karevi is leaving is going to be a very, very hard thing for them to deal with, because he is just such a key man for so many of the things they do. So he's not just the kind of guy that you can just bring in a straight replacement. They don't have these guys just waiting in the wings. So Karevi is leaving. Who else is leaving? Timu is leaving, which is kind of disappointing because he's only really been coming to the top of his game in the last year or two. Higginbotham's leaving, you can kind of understand given his age. Paia'awa is leaving as well. He's kind of been in and out of the team. Naivalu is leaving and Aiden Toa is leaving. Aiden Toa didn't play much at all this season. They are getting Henry Spate in, so that's kind of a bit of good news. And guys who are confirmed for next year, Taniela Tupou, the Smith brothers, the props, Blythe, Hawkins, Rodder, and Salakai Lotto. So locking department, they are sorted props. They're pretty good. McDermott and Sarovi, so for number 9 they're pretty sorted. I don't know what happened to Tuttle. He seems to have disappeared off the radar. Jock Campbell, who's quite the young talent. Likewise Dalgunu and Jordan Pataya, who got injured really early on. He may end up taking the midfield spot if that's where they choose to play him. But yeah, they've still got a few guys to sort out contracts for. We'll kind of watch that to see how things go. I do like the fact that Brad Thorn has been, I forgot to mention some of the games, has been using the young talent. That is good. And some of their results were actually pretty decent. Like, they opened the season with 3 losses in a row, which is disappointing. They lost to the Highlanders away, they lost to the Crusaders at home, which is a pretty hard way to start the season, but neither of them were hiding. 36-31 to the Highlanders, 22-12 to the Crusaders, so no disgrace there. Where I think they did let themselves down were a few of their domestic kind of Australian Conference rivals. So they lost to the Waratahs away, 28-17. They lost to the Waratahs later on in the season, 40-32, and that was at home. So the Waratahs didn't even make the playoffs, so the Reds needed to be getting those wins. Likewise, the Rebels, 32-13 at home, and then 30-24 away. No wins over the Rebels, no wins over the Waratahs. That's pretty bad. They did get the 2 over the Sunwolves, which was good. They got 1 over the Brumbies and then lost the other one. But if they'd picked up a couple more wins, if you put that with their win over the Blues, which they had nothing to play for, and the Blues had everything to play for, they still got the result. They only lost to the Chiefs, 19-13. They beat the Stormers at home, and probably their best result of the season was they went to Durban and beat the Sharks 21-14. Nobody expected them to get that. If you add a couple of extra wins over the Tars or the Rebels into that mix, and this season looks a whole lot different for the Reds, so they're not that far away. How they go without Karevi really remains to be seen. I hope that Brad Thorne is going to be given a little bit more time to get his plan into action. I think he's one step the way there. You know, that first year, all those guys you're working with, for the most part, aren't your players. I know some of them were from his Queensland country days, so he's kind of got that step up. And then second year, you should be embedding and then getting rid of the players you don't want. So third year is where I really want them to kick off. Hopefully, we see that for the Reds next year. Hopefully, they can sign some more guys up to contracts. And, I guess we'll see how they go. You guys let me know your thoughts on the Reds season. How do you think they're going to go next year? And I will talk to you again soon. See you later.